Hello, everybody. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. We are going to look at the solutions of the questions that you have just solved, and I hope you are able to hear me. Am I audible, guys? Please let me know if I'm audible to all of you. Just tell me that I'm audible. If you just write a yes, I will know that I'm audible. Okay, great. So let's get started. You've just now solved three passages, and mostly those passages are of around 655 level to 700 level difficulty. All right. And the questions are a mix of anything between, um, medium, hard, and hard. One or two easy questions were there. All right. So, all of you, once again, welcome. My name is Sunita, and I'll be your host for this entire session. I have tons of teaching experience, and I have also curated the entire verbal course at GMAT Viz. Love teaching, love finding solutions. And today we are going to follow the involved and evolved reading approach to solve these RC questions. Okay. So this was the first passage, all right, which all of you attempted. And I'm just going to take a little bit of your time to show you how you should read these passages. Okay. Again, I'm not going to take too much of time. I'm just going to discuss with you by following the involved and evolved reading approach, how you can answer these questions efficiently. That means without wasting time and with high accuracy. Okay. Forgive my throat, I mean my voice or a cold. So I hope that will not hinder our understanding. Okay, let's get started, guys. So the thumb rule when you're solving these questions is not to read too much at the same time. Okay. What do I mean by that? Let me show you. Many musicologists consider jazz, okay, so I'm talking about somebody's opinion about jazz, the only purely American form of music. All right. So we're talking about the opinion of some musicologists. Others, however, a transition here, a debate here, an argument here, argue that jazz is rooted in a history similar to that of America itself, a history of confluence. So there's one group which thinks it's purely American, one group which thinks it's a history of confluence. That means it is not purely American. So in my head, I am itemizing this zone as okay, we've got a debate here about whether jazz is purely American or not. Okay, and with this, I'm going to move to the next para. The immigration of Europeans and slave trade of West Africans to America. So basically, we are talking about West Africa and European. So immigrants who are Europeans, West Africans who are slaves to America, resulted in a convergence of cultures, traditions, and art forms, including music. Okay, so here the author is talking about mix of cultures, Europeans, West Africans, Americans, the confluence of cultures, which was mentioned in the first paragraph. All right. Jazz, first played in New Orleans in the early 1900s, borrowed heavily from the European musical scale. Okay, so here we are talking about the European influence and harmonic system. Okay, so this we are talking about how the European system uh, kind of lent its impact on jazz. Jazz ensembles were built predominantly on European instruments, okay, such as the trumpet, trombone, etc., etc. Okay, Western influence. So, in my head, okay, this little zone here is all about the European influence on jazz. So, you see, I'm creating zones in my head. I'm not eliminating anything, but neither am I by hearting everything. And I'm reading small portions at a time. I'm constantly connecting. So, we have a debate, jazz purely American or not. And then we have the author telling us it's a mix of cultures and how the Europeans influence jazz. Let's go ahead. The Western African influence on jazz was manifested primarily in its performance. Okay. So the Europeans' influence was the instrument, but the Western influence was the performance. And that's the difference. Scatting, a technique used by jazz vocalists. All right, so scatting was used in the performance to mimic the sounds of the instruments. Okay, so humans, so we're talking about West influence on jazz, which was performance, which was mimicking sounds of the instruments. The emphasis on improvisation in jazz, in addition to group participation, also came from West Africa, African music. So this bit here is all about the African influence on jazz. So debate, mix, European influence, African influence. Let's go ahead to the third para. Proponents of the argument, okay, so we're talking about certain supporters, that jazz is purely American. Okay, remember we had this debate here. So people who support that, yes, it's completely American, point to its genesis in New Orleans as evidence for this perspective because it first originated in New Orleans. Perhaps New Orleans is a place in America, and therefore they are saying it's purely American. Let's read ahead. The irony, however, okay. So clearly, we are going to now look at the author's viewpoint. Is that the essence of America lies in the plurality of its roots? Okay. So America means plurality. That means plural things. That means Africa, Europe, America. That's American essence. All right. To deny the rich and complex history of jazz and the true origins of the art form is, in effect, denying the very aspects of art form that make it undeniably American. All right, so according to the author, what we have the author's take here on the debate, and the author believes that there is a mixed influence on jazz, and that is why it is undeniably American. Because it is there is a mixed influence, that is why it is undeniably American. So this entire passage is about a debate about a certain music form, and the author believes it is about influences of different cultures, and that is very American in essence, that very influence of different cultures. So this is how you should read every passage. Again, I'm not going to take up so much time on every passage today, but I hope you have understood. Do let me know if the process is clear to all of you. Just type a clear so that I know you're very clear about the process. And then we are going to quickly go to the questions directly. Are you clear about the process? Great. Okay. So here's the first question. Now, the first step was to read in an involved and evolved manner. The second step is that you read the question stem carefully, and then you do a little bit of pre-thinking, quick 5-second pre-thinking before you dive into the options. So here's what we will do. It can be inferred from the passage, okay, it's an inference question, that the author would be less inclined to label jazz as an American art form if which of the correct option according to the author's point of view. Now remember, the author's point of view was the last para, and that's our pre-thinking. So according to the author, there is a mixed influence on jazz that makes it American. If it was not mixed, then it would not be American in essence. So we are looking for an option which says that had this jazz form not been a mixed influence form, it would not be American. Okay, so let's go ahead. New Orleans was not the place where jazz music was first placed. This is actually casting a doubt on a data point. This is absolutely out. Jazz music was first created in New York. So this talks about creation in New York. And remember, according to the author, it was not just about creation, it was about the influence of the European instruments, of African performance, and where it was played in America. But I'll just read on. Where four avant-garde musicians from different cultural backgrounds came together to experiment with unprecedented musical concepts. I think this is going quite outside the purview or scope of the paragraph. The scope of the paragraph is not where it was first created and who performed it. So I'm going to rule out B. With the influx of West Africans to the Americas, okay, came a very specific West African musical style, which eventually came to be called jazz. So the question is, the author would be less inclined to label jazz as American. The author would be less, inclined to if it was specifically belonging to one culture. And C is telling me it was specific to West Africa. So I'm going to keep C on hold. Jazz music actually draws more of its character from South American and Native American traditions. So this would make it an influence. Again, this would be something that the author would be inclined to agree with. Instruments used by jazz musicians were of African origin, not European origin. But then it would still mean influence of something outside of America. So this would again be something that the author would agree with. So C is the correct answer, which is something that the author would be less likely to agree with. All right. I hope that is clear. So I'm going to go to the next option. If you want to look at the explanation once again, do watch the recording on YouTube later on. This was the second question. Which of the following statements concerning jazz is most directly suggested in the passage? So this is more like a direct question type, and we cannot really pre-think here because it's a very open question. The entire passage is talking about jazz. So I'm going to read the options one by one and keep connecting it in my head with what I have read in the passage. All right, let's start. So the plurality of jazz's roots has led multiple cultures to claim jazz as their own. Do we have multiple cultures calling jazz their own? No. It's just that the author says there are some people saying that some people claim jazz to be American, but we don't have multiple cultures and we can't infer that also. So this is out. If jazz musicians had not borrowed from European musical scale, they would have used West African musical scale. We don't know that what they would have used, not given in the passage. Only European and African cultures had an influence. The problem is with this only. All right. We could have had others, but I'm kind of going to keep C on hold for the moment. In the exam, you don't rule out anything very quickly. Jazz was played in West Africa prior to its introduction, not mentioned. Instrumentation was not a primary component of West African influence. Now, West African influence was mentioned here, right? And here we are talking about improvisation being one important thing and performance being another important thing. So, instrumentation was not a primary component. This is correct because instrumentation was a primary component which was European in nature, where we spoke about the different instruments. So E is definitely directly stated. This only thing is not implied anywhere. So the correct answer is E. This was not as hard as the previous question. The previous question was hard. This was, you could say, this was a medium difficulty level. All right. Let's go to the next question. Let me see if you have any queries so far. Great. I don't have any queries. Here's the third question. Which of the following elements of jazz, okay, most likely has its origin in West African musical tradition? So again, I know that the last para is what the African musical, sorry, this part of the second para is talking about the African influence. Once again, I'm reminded of improvisation, scatting, vocal traditions, performance. Let me go to the options. The emphasis on a tonal harmonic structure, not given anywhere. Use of an instrument to mimic the vocalist sound, it was the opposite. The vocalist was mimicking the instrument sound, so this is wrong. The use of traditional African instruments, no. Use of many instruments in a jazz ensemble, this was more about the influence of the European culture. And impromptu is improvisation, call and response between two instruments. So impromptu is what I'll go with, and therefore E. Okay. So we have one more question. Again, this was also one of the hard questions. The author of the passage would most likely agree with. Okay, we need the author's opinion. So, which means again, it's the last para that we need to refer to. And author believes jazz's uh, plurality makes it American. Sorry, the spelling is wrong. Sorry, guys. This should be plurality. Cultural background. It's pluralistic in nature. That makes it American. So now we're going to go through the options. Although American football was derived from the English sports of soccer and rugby. Okay, so we're talking about American English. It should be called purely American because it was first played in America. I'm just going to keep this on hold. I don't think it's the answer, but in the exam, you shouldn't rule out anything just immediately because I'm getting this plural thing here, which is fine. But first played in America is probably not the reason. Because American football was derived from English sports of soccer and rugby, it should not be called an American sport. No, that's also not what the author is trying to say. So this is also out. Most sports scholars deny the English origins of American football. Now, this is not what the author believes. Again, what makes American football American is its derivation from the English sports. Okay, so we're talking about plurality here. So I'm going to keep D on hold. Because the essence of America lies in the plurality of its roots, American football should not be called American sport. No, this is not what the author is saying. Now, between A and D, of course, I have one reason to rule out A. First played in America is not the reason why the author believes jazz is American. So it has to be D. That brings us to the end of this first passage. I hope it was all clear. Samriddhi says, per your method, I spent a lot of time reading the passage and understanding it. So I avoided going back to it while answering a question. Any idea how to deal with it? So, Samriddhi, you noticed, right, that I could recall or connect the zone from which the answer was borrowed. And I went back only to confirm my answers, not to search for it. You can do the same thing, all right? You should be able to recall the zone, maybe make a just one short phrase summary of each para that you're reading, and then know where to go back if at all you want to confirm your answer. So hold on to choices that you are not sure about. That's what I did also. Okay? All right, let's go to the second passage. Now, here's the second passage. Again, 3 paragraphs. Let's again quickly itemize the paragraphs. I submit that. Okay, so we have the author's belief. Impact of solid bodies is the most fundamental, that means basic, of all interstellar processes, space processes that have taken place on the terrestrial planets. All right. So we are talking about impact of solid bodies is the basic of all processes that have taken place on planets. Without impact, Earth, Mars, Venus, and Mercury would not exist. So this part is telling us that the impact of solid bodies has led to the creation of planets. Without them, those planets would not have been created. So that's my way of just putting a zone there. We are talking about the importance of the impact of solid bodies and the creation of planets. Let's move further. Simply put, okay, simply put means the author is going to further elaborate on this. The collision of smaller objects, okay, that means impact of small bodies colliding, is the process by which terrestrial planets were born. So we're talking about how terrestrial planets were born. On the surface, that the geological record of the earliest history of the impacts. Okay, so the earliest history of impacts on the terrestrial planets has been lost. We're talking about early history of such impacts is lost, and that's a problem. Why is it a problem? As the process is self-erasing to a certain extent, the earliest record would have been lost even if the processes of melting and internal evolution of the planets had not occurred. So, till here, we are basically talking about the loss of earliest data of impact, because the process is self erasing, means after the impact, the evidence of the impact probably automatically gets erased from the planet. All right, and that's a problem. All right, but then the author is saying that the earliest data would have been lost um, even if the processes had not occurred. So earliest data loss would have happened anyways. But so I have a change of idea here with this but. So I'm going to focus on this but here. One second. This is important. Much of the record of the last stages of accretion of planets. Now, if you don't know the meaning of accretion, don't worry. Look at the context. Last stages of accretion here probably could mean the last stages of the formation of planet, or the melting and internal evolution of planets is preserved, especially on Moon, Mercury, and Mars. Okay, so we do have some data. In fact, the last stage of accretion is still going on, albeit at a very slow rate. So, this paragraph is about two zones. One zone is telling me that the earliest data is lost. It would have been lost any which ways because of the self erasing nature of the processes. And the second part of the paragraph tells me that the last stage of that entire process is not lost, and it's even ongoing currently, sorry. Okay, all right. This is fortunate. Now, this is fortunate means what is fortunate? This is fortunate, right? The last stage data being available is fortunate. The accretion ongoing currently is fortunate. Why? Because the author will tell us why. We can study many aspects of the processes of planetary birth. That is why the incidence of the last available data and accretion going on is important, because we can find out a lot about the process of planetary birth. How? By investigation of the nature of small bodies that are still there. So we can investigate Moon, Mercury, and Mars. That is one. Then the author sees, so this is one thing. The dynamics of the orbital evolution, this is second. And the effects that they produce ultimately things that we can investigate and find out more about the birth of the planets. Okay. If impact and accretion were not still occurring, that means the ongoing accretion that we were talking about in the last stages, okay, it would be hard to come to grips with a number of difficult problems. Okay, so what we are saying here is a number of difficult problems of planetary origin and early evolution would not have been solved if the last stage data and ongoing accretion were not available. So basically, the last paragraph is saying that investigation of last stage data plus the ongoing accretion helps us to study the birth of planets. And there are three things that we can investigate. All right. I'm not going to go back to memorize what those three things are. Any moment the question asks me, I can come back to this zone. So, see, I'm creating zones when I'm reading. Okay. Now, here's the first question: the primary purpose of the passage. Now, for the primary purpose, it is important that I link all these things. So, I'm going to link this to this, this to this, and this to this. And finally, what I have is, um, you know, earliest data not being there is a problem, but we can look at the last stage data and ongoing accretion. We can investigate three things about them to study the birth of planets. So I'm like going to put those two things together. I mean, this is what the last paragraph says, right? And I'm going to focus my answer choice. I'm going to choose an answer choice which follows this closely. That's the primary purpose. Present evidence that argues against a common misconception. There is no misconception mentioned in the passage at all. Undermine means weaken a claim. Is the author trying to weaken a claim? No, not at all. There is no claim made which the author is going against. Let's cut it out. Argue for the importance of using existing planetary conditions to understand prior cosmic occurrences? No. Although I'm going to keep C on hold for a moment, to be honest, um, because it's talking about prior cosmic occurrence, which can be the birth of planets, um, and it's talking about existing planetary conditions, which could refer to underscore means highlight the importance of an astronomical process, okay, and describe ways in which we can understand this process. I get it. So if I look at C is just referring to the second paragraph. All right. C is referring, this is C, which says that existing planetary conditions are being used, the ongoing accretion, to understand prior cosmic occurrences. But the last paragraph has not been included in option C. So I would say option C is limited in scope. We at GMAT scope choice covers that. Underscoring means highlighting the importance of an astronomical process. That astronomical process is the impact of solid bodies, collision, and the ways in which we can understand this process is referring to these investigation of three things that we had highlighted here. So D looks closer to it. I'm going to still go on to E. Discuss how, unless immediate action is taken, I think no immediate action was referred to anything. So D is the correct answer on this question. All right. Remember, I shortlisted C, but when I read D, I realized what C was not including. C was not including the third paragraph, and a primary purpose passage should refer to everything. All right. So D refers to the impact of solid bodies. This is the astronomical process. It also refers to the second paragraph, which talks about the importance of that process, and the third paragraph, which talks about the um, ways in which we can understand that process. So D is the correct answer. Again, please watch the recording if you want to go through that explanation once again. We are short on time and we want to make sure we have the explanations of all the answers. It can be most reasonably inferred that, okay, inference question. Which of the following accounts for, okay, lack of geological record concerning the history of impacts on on the planets? Now, I remember the first part of the second para talks about earliest data is lost because of the self-erasing process. Let me go through the options. If need be, I'll go back to the para, not now. Samriddhi, I hope this answers your question. Violence, no. Outcome that is not self-erasing. Um, so if the outcome that is not self-erasing was there, then we would actually, uh, you know, have the data, not lack of data. So this is wrong. A process of change in planets themselves. Change in planets, could that refer to the absence of proof relating to hypothetical collision? No, there is no hypothetical collision. The collision is it is the ongoing process which is actually about the existing record. This is not about the lack of the record. So by way of elimination, C is the only one which is left, and therefore it is the correct answer. Authors suggest that at least some of a number of difficult problems can be understood by. So we know the number of difficult problems here would be related to planetary origin and early evolution. Okay, and we can understand it by it's given here, investigation of the nature of celestial bodies. All right, so I'm thinking of this part, and I'm going to go through the options. Extrapolating from observable phenomena. Extrapolating, now suppose I don't know the meaning, I'm going to put a question mark on this choice and move to the next one. Don't eliminate something that you don't know is right or wrong. Anticipating the result of collision, no, this is not how we understand the difficult problems. Studying the rate of accretion, okay. I'm just going to hold on to this because it was one of the things that we are studying, right? Accretion still occurring. Observing the internal process of the planets. Um, Internal process, I don't think that's quite it. Discounting the dynamics of how orbits change. It's not by discounting it. We need to account for it. So I think here the closest bit is between A and C. Is it the rate of accretion mentioned? It's not mentioned anyway. So I'm going to rule this out. And I'm going to now, for your benefit, extrapolate means to extend the application of a method or conclusion. So, observable phenomena is basically we are referring to the ongoing accretion, all right? And this is helpful to study the birth of planets. This is going to be helpful to solve a number of difficult problems. And observable phenomena you can apply to whatever you want to apply to in terms of understanding how the birth of planets took place earlier. So this is one of the hardest questions that we've done today. In fact, out of all the questions that we've done today, this is the hardest. And I think most of you got this wrong. Okay. So Samriddhi, you need to Samriddhi and um, Afla, yes, you could write a short line, your understanding or your takeaway from the passage. You could do that, definitely. And Samriddhi says, why not E in the earlier question? Samriddhi, it would be good if you can go back and watch that. All right. Let me see if I can take you back. Question number 2. Okay. So this is question number 2. Why not E? The question says lack of geological record. So ongoing process of accretion, we have this record. We have it. Lack of records. That is why E is not the answer. All right, Samriddhi? So we're going to go to passage 3, but let me see if I've answered all your questions. Stangs, I have also stongs, sorry. So I hope all of you are clear why it's not E on the previous question. It's A. Okay. You're welcome. Let's move to the third passage. Now, this is the bigger passage, but trust me, you can do the same zone creation if you follow the involved and evolved reading method that we at GMAT Wiz are so proud of. So, let me quickly just, I'll share with you 2 links. One is the link, let me just share it with you. So, one is the link to the free trial version of the course if you are so interested. Okay, you can take a look at the free trial version of the course. Let me just share the link with you. Just a moment. So the link is visible on screen. That's the link you can use to check out more closely, the whole process of involved and evolved reading. All right. And I'm also going to share another link with you. If you're facing issues with your GMAT prep, you can have a free chat by booking a session, booking a free call online with our strategy experts. I'm going to share that link with you as well. So you have the link available on the screen, which you can use to talk to our strategy experts to help you out with your prep. All right. Okay. With that, let's move to the discussion of this question. Okay. All right. Feminist movements in early 20th century Japan. So in my head, I'm going to call this FM. okay, in century Japan are often overshadowed. Overshadowed means blocked out, taken over, pushed into the background by the country's rapid modernization and political reforms. Okay, so rapid modernization, political reforms in Japan somehow blocked out the feminist movements in the early 20th century. Okay, so I'm going to just hold on to that idea. Seitosha, so I'm going to call this SM just for the sake of Seitosha movement, an elite group of women writers and intellectuals who advocated for gender equality, okay, through literary and cultural critique. So scholars have focused on this movement but have not focused on the earlier 20th century feminist movements. And let's see what the author says about this movement further. So, I mean, this movement, while groundbreaking, so we're talking about the Setosha movement was groundbreaking, was largely confined to urban centers. That means it did not reach the rural areas, it did not cater to the um, uneducated women. Its leaders faced intense backlash from a society that was rooted in Confucian ideals. That means Confucian ideals were, I guess, against feminism, which prioritized familial roles over individual ambitions, I guess, of women. So if I shortlist this paragraph in my head, I'm saying that the earliest feminist movements were blocked out by modernization and political reforms, and the focus was only on urban Setosha movement and which faced criticism. That's all. Then I'll go to the next para. And we're talking about Setosha's influence in this entire para. So it was sparking conversation. We are saying though it was significant, it has been overstated. So, overstated by whom? These scholars here. They have overstated its importance. Many rural women, who constituted the majority of Japan's female population, were largely unaffected by the debates that dominated Setosha's agenda. Why? For them, the pressing concerns were economic survival and access to basic healthcare, areas where incremental progress was made during this period. Okay, hold on. So in this paragraph, we are saying Setosha was, remember, it was confined to urban centers, limited to educated women. Rural women had more things to worry about. They had survival to worry about. They had basic healthcare to worry about. All right. So they did not really bother much about the Setosha movement. So this paragraph is talking about rural women focused on survival and basics, and they were unaffected by Setosha movement. Let's move to the third paragraph. The relationship between feminist movements and industrialization remains unexplored. Okay, so studies have not been done on how the feminist movement were impacted or connected to whatever modernization or industrialization that was happening in Japan. And probably the author is going to explain more on this. Urban women engaged in intellectual debates. So remember, the Setosha movement was about urban women, educated women. Rural women often found themselves taking greater economic responsibilities. Economic responsibilities would be what kind of economic survival, basic healthcare. Due to the migration of men to jobs. Okay, so because of industrialization, the rural men moved to the cities, and the rural women, they had more important issues to think about rather than think about feminist movements. So the feminist movements, they affected the urban areas but did not affect the rural areas. Okay, this shift, that means shift of men to industrial hubs, altered traditional family dynamics, changed it, creating spaces for women to assert themselves more powerful in the rural areas because men shifted. Even if these changes were not recognized as part of the feminist movement. So basically, the author is saying feminist movement did take place in the rural area also, but not exactly the way it was documented. All right. So feminist movements, I put a question mark there because like that's not being well documented. Industrialization, the relationship not investigated. Different effects of that feminist movement and industrialization was there on rural and urban women. So my understanding of this passage is we're talking about how feminist movements um, were not really well studied, and their connection with industrialization was not well studied. um, Rural feminist movements were movements which the scholars focused on, but they did not focus on, sorry, urban feminist movements were what the scholars focused on. They did not focus on the rural feminist movements, which were very subtle because the men moved to the industrial hubs. With this understanding, I'm going to go to the paragraph, the questions. The passage is primarily concerned with. Now, I'm going to put together, the paragraphs. We're talking about early feminist movements blocked out by modernization and political reforms, focus only on urban Setosha movement, and there were different effects of the feminist movement on the rural and urban women. All of these things I'm going to put together in my correct answer choice. All right. So I'll get started. Primarily concerned with analyzing the failure of a movement. I don't think they're analyzing the failure of a movement. They are rather analyzing the idea that the movements were not the feminist movements of earlier 20th century Japan had not been documented well. Also, it failed to address societal challenges. It's not about societal challenges also. So this is out. Advocating for greater recognition of rural contribution to a movement. The author is not saying that more recognition should be given to them. That's not the primary purpose. That was just one line in the end. Critiquing the societal resistance faced by intellectual groups. That was just in the first para. Evaluating the role of economic factors in shaping cultural movements, too broad. It's not about cultural movements, it's specifically about feminist movements, and it's not evaluating the role of economic factors as such. Challenging the overemphasis on a prominent aspect of our movement. So this captures this idea that um, obscured, and it was only so I would have marked E because I can rule out the others, although E is not exactly the way I imagined it. So E is the answer. Next, it can be inferred that the author of the passage, okay, would be most likely to include responsibilities referred to economic survival. Since the men shifted, women would now be taking care of the financial part of the day-to-day needs. So I'm looking for that in my answer choice. Taking on rural women did not take on jobs. Overseeing household finances and farm operations. I'm going to keep this on hold. Supporting family income through craft production, not mentioned. Advocating about healthcare costs, I think. Assisting with migration of male family members, no. So this was actually the easiest question on the whole lot of 11 questions that you had. So you should have got this right. I think most of you did get this right. And that brings us to the last question of the evening. The existence of which of the following would most seriously undermine means weaken the author's argument. We have to weaken the author's argument concerning feminist movements. Now, first, let's rethink what was the author's opinion. Author's opinion is early feminist movements were blocked out, overshadowed by modern reforms, political reforms, modernization, and the focus was only on the Setosha movement, not on the rural feminist movements. Okay, so we have to weaken this. How can we weaken this? A possible weakener would be that if we can show that early movements also focused on rural women, or rural movements were also investigated, something like that. Okay, letters from rural women, and I'm thinking So this is a CR type of question, guys. So we have to come up with new information. Letters from rural women expressing strong support for Setosha movement. So this would be bridging the gap between rural and urban women, and this would weaken the contention that the focus only on Setosha urban movement and it was not about rural women. So A, I'm going to keep it's bridging the gap between rural and urban, and this would weaken the author's opinion. Records showing that rural women's economic roles were unaffected by industrialization. So this would actually strengthen the idea, not weaken it. Articles by Setosha members acknowledging the movement's lack of influence outside urban centers. This would again go, with the idea. Data indicating that urban women's participation surpassed that of rural women. This was also support the author's point of view that the focus was only on the urban feminist movements. Surveys revealing widespread awareness of Setosha among rural women during its peak. E comes very close. So I'm just going to compare, um, A and E. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to compare A and E. So A, we are saying letters from rural women indicating that rural women were educated and they were supporting the intellectual debate. This would weaken the author's idea, right? Because the author says that the focus was on Setosha movement, which was educated and which was limited to educated women. So, and widespread awareness of Setosha. There could be awareness without the rural women getting affected by it. So I'm going to go with A for this one. That brings us to the end of this session. I hope, guys, this was really helpful for all of you. Do let me know if you enjoyed this particular method of reading. This is the method that we follow at GMAT Quiz, the involved and evolved reading. And most of my students have been able to increase their verbal scores by as much as, people from, one second, guys. I'm so sorry, guys. Just needed a sip of water. So thank you very much for attending this webinar.